I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, to tariff or not to tariff, that is the question, with apologies to Hamlet. But it is what people are talking about. Whatever you think of him, President Trump has certainly turned the status quo upside down. And from his point of view, it works. By simply threatening to apply tariffs to all Canadian goods if we didn't take action on our border and fentanyl issues, our Prime Minister and Premiers sprung into action. Helicopters to the border, more raids on mega drug labs, drones in the air. But how will we respond to actual tariffs? Canadian politicians and economists have had various ideas. We'll match your tariffs dollar for dollar, or we will target sectors that Americans care most about. Even our NDP Premier floated the idea that we would take liquor and wine off BC shelves if they came from red Republican states. I guess that means Kentucky bourbon is out and California wines are in. While one can't give in to bullies, I think it's still fair to ask some questions. Will retaliatory tariffs work? Stop a trade war? Change President Trump's mind? Or does it just up the ante? And who pays the cost? Consumers on both sides of the border, I would say. One economist has written an essay titled, "Tariff Retaliation is a Dead End. Canada needs to retool its economy, not chase self-defeating tariffs." Her name is Dr. Roslyn Kunin. Roz is an award-winning labor economist and forecaster who has taught at both UBC and SFU. Amongst her many career accomplishments, she served 20 years as regional economist for the federal government. Back in a moment to talk tariffs. We're joined now by Roz Kunin. And Roz, you wrote quite an amazing article recently that really says retaliatory tariffs, it's a non-starter, they don't work, why are we talking about it? Tell me why that's your position.
Okay, well, I keep thinking of the old ads that were on the back of comic books about the 90-pound weakling and the big bully.
Yes.
And when it comes to trade, the senior Trudeau once said it was the elephant and the mouse, the United States and Canada, or we're the 90-pound weakling. Canada is a very open economy, and 30 to 40% of our economy is in foreign trade. And 80% of that trade is with the United States. So if the United States puts tariffs against us, that is really going to hurt, and I hope we're already planning to do something in case that eventuality happens. The United States is a very closed economy. Only about 20% of their economy is in foreign trade, and a very small share of that is with Canada. So tariffs hurt the people who are administrating them as well as the people they are aimed against. And if we put tariffs against the United States, because trade is so minor, Canadian trade is such a minor part of their economy, they won't even notice, but we will suddenly be doing without all kinds of things like oranges and American liquors that we've already decided we aren't going to, bourbon, and all those other sorts of things that come from there. So it would hurt us, and politically, I suspect that most of our leaders will say, well, politically we can't say we'll keep our borders open and you can put tariffs against us, even though that would be better for us economically. But we're going to pay the price. If we put tariffs against everything from the United States, not only will we lose our export market to our biggest customer, but we will suddenly find that we don't have the imports and products and things that we need.
So what are the effects of tariffs in the first place? Do you think that President Trump understands tariffs?
I'm on television, so I can't say what I really think of that. But no, he doesn't understand them at all. And I remember being outraged a month ago when he was saying we're going to put tariffs. In this case, he was still talking about Chinese cars. We're going to put tariffs on the cars. They're going to be 100% tariffs on these Chinese cars, and they're going to bring in piles of money into the American Treasury. And what he didn't understand about tariffs, if tariffs are designed to stop things coming in. So if you put a huge tariff on Chinese cars, for example, then Chinese cars are going to become so expensive in the States that few, if any of them, are going to come into the States, and you'll have nothing to collect your tariffs on. And he didn't realize that, and frequently his mindset and view about how the economy and other things work are from previous times that don't quite fit in the 21st century. He believes we can get jobs back into the United States by bringing manufacturing back, and we'll have all the nice, good, well-paid union jobs in the car industry and so on that we had in the 50s, without realizing that even if we get car industries back, they're going to be automated and they're going to need the kind of high-skilled people that United States is a little bit short of. And if they stop immigrants, they're not going to have very many of it all. So he won't realize that. He also sometimes goes back about 100 years or more to the time when the United States, at the beginning of the 20th century, got its government income from tariffs. It didn't have income tax. Income tax, and I always find this amusing, was a temporary measure put in place to finance the First World War.
And then, they'll be gone, right? No.
And so he thinks that, well, let's go back to that time, and I'll put tariffs on everything, and we'll have all kinds of income from tariffs, and we won't have to have any income tax. Another thing that he forgot that has changed since 100 years ago or so is government responsibilities are very much greater. We didn't have pensions, we didn't have Medicare, we didn't have employment insurance, we didn't have all kinds of things. You know, we didn't have to regulate communications and internet and those sorts of things. All these things, we certainly didn't have a space program. And all these kinds of things are now part of government, and government isn't a tiny fraction of the economy that it was at the beginning, 100 years ago, and now is very, very big, and even if you did have lots of tariffs, you couldn't possibly support.
Are tariffs inflationary?
Definitely. And that leaves, that would leave Mark Carney and others who are bankers with a great big dilemma, because tariffs, if they are implemented, are going to slow the economy. We will have fewer exports, imports will become more expensive, jobs will decline as factories close, investment will drop, because uncertainty is the one thing for sure that can affect investment. Business can learn to deal with almost anything but uncertainty. So we won't have investment, consumers will be losing their jobs, we will be into a recession. Okay, the standard treatment for a recession in monetary policy is lower interest rates. Yeah. On the other hand, speaking like a true economist, on the other hand, tariffs are inflationary. Everything you bring in becomes more expensive. Everything you make here to replace imports is going to be more expensive, because the reason you weren't making it here before was because somebody else could make it cheaper. So we're going to have both inflation and a stagnant, declining economy. What do you do with interest rates then? I'm very glad I'm not running the Bank of Canada.
And perhaps Carney wishes he were there rather than running for Prime Minister. But if we say, okay, this is not a good idea, retaliatory tariffs, what's the politician to do? I mean, really, people in Canada are mad. They want some action. I don't think they would be satisfied if the politicians said, well, we're going to do nothing.
Well, I fearlessly forecast that we're going to put in some tariffs anyway, just for the political reasons and for the emotional pressure of Canadians. What we can do to help our economy through the stagflation that tariffs would bring is things that we should have done a long time ago and didn't do, and this is not surprising because everybody has been saying it. We should have free trade within Canada. We should remove all kinds of barriers to goods and people and professions and everything coming between provincial borders. I've known companies who have done business in the States because they said it was easier to deal with regulations going into the States than to deal with regulations going to Alberta. That is insane. It shouldn't be illegal for you to carry a can of beer across the border into Alberta.
When I was in government, this discussion's been going on forever, and we did do a bit of a deal with Alberta, but it was painful negotiations over a long time, and it got stuck on things like the size of tires on the truck. So BC truck could get to the border, but he didn't have the regulation tires to go into Alberta.
Now, I am going to suggest something that nobody is going to follow that would solve this problem quickly and easily.
Okay.
But it's not going to happen. And it is basically that provinces should unilaterally declare anything that's good enough for another province in Canada is good enough for us. Now, that would make sense. It wouldn't take time. It would be easy to implement. But I mean, to say that, like doctors can't practice across provincial borders. If you went to Toronto and got sick, you'd go to a doctor and you'd have as much faith in that doctor as you would for a doctor in BC. But if that doctor came to BC, he couldn't touch you. So all those are the kinds of things that we really need to do something about. Make it one country. We're looking after Canada. We recognize the other provinces in Canada. And that would be something the federal government would have to do.
Well, the Premier of Nova Scotia just recently introduced legislation saying, we will recognize your regulations if you recognize ours. So do you think that's a start?
That is definitely a start. It would be even better if he said, we will recognize your regulations whether you recognize ours or not, and we'll be able to take advantage of all your things without you taking advantage of us. So
that probably isn't going to work, but I thought that was interesting that he was willing to put Nova Scotia out there first.
Yeah. So hopefully we will start, I have been saying for all my career that we need to get rid of interprovincial barriers. I've been saying for all my career that we need credential recognition for people from outside the country.
And we're going to continue this conversation right after we take a quick break. Dr. Roslyn Kunin has been talking for years about how we should get our economy moving in Canada. And I think, Ros, finally, most people recognize we've got a real problem, that we're not independent enough and our business has not been increasing in the way it should. And one of the things you've talked about is we've just got to diversify our exports. But then we have Germany come to us and ask for resources, and we say, oh, there's no business case. Japan comes and we say no. So how are we going to change that?
Well, I hope, you've got to find a silver lining to every cloud. You never waste a good crisis. I hope the reality of the threats that are facing our economy right now are going to make people realize that maybe we dropped the ball a few times in the past. We could have been exporting liquid natural gas to Europe when Russia invaded Ukraine and they really needed it. But we didn't have the infrastructure, and a lot of people were looking at the other side of the question and saying, well, carbon-based fuels are not good for the environment. Unfortunately, we are going to need carbon-based fuels, at least in the interim term. Gas is better than coal and some other carbon-based fuels that people have been using. We didn't put the infrastructure in place. We lost that opportunity. So now I'm hoping we will say we need to provide the goods and services that people need. We need to balance the trade-offs between the economy and the environment. We can't go around despoiling the environment and so on, but we've got to, when we look at things for environment, we've got to do a little bit of cost-benefit analysis. I'm talking like an economist, and say, okay, this is the environmental cost of that. Is it too high? Is it better than other alternatives or so on? And these are the benefits, and make some informed decisions on what we do with respect to the environment and the economy and trade. And we've got to start improving our productivity. I'm being a really dismal economist today. Canadians are beginning to be aware, with all this talk of the 51st state, that if we were the 51st state, our per capita income would be lower than all the states of the United States, including Mississippi and Alabama. We don't see ourselves as poor as Mississippi and Alabama, but we are, and furthermore, our per capita income has been falling. We haven't been in a recession yet because we're bringing all the people in and they're producing, though not very well, so our total gross national product has been positive. It has been growing, albeit slowly. But per capita, because we have more people to divide that slow-growing pie among, our standard of living has been falling. And we need to start looking at the kinds of things that are going to make us more productive. We need to cut the red tape and the regulation. We need to realize that time is a scarce resource. I mean, here in Vancouver, it's practically a bad joke how long it takes to get a permit to do anything. And that doesn't have to be. The classic example of how to do it is Kelowna. Kelowna used AI, one of the new tools that we have now that we didn't have before, to look after their permitting process. So if you want a building permit in Kelowna, you put in the form, AI reads it, checks it against all the qualifications, says yes or no in 10 minutes. Because AI is not perfect, people in the office then look over the application and you get your yes or no within days. Whereas we can all think of examples where people have waited months and years in Vancouver to get a permit to decide whether to go or no go. And basically, very often, the go that they do go is pick themselves up and leave Vancouver and don't do the project.
The slow maybe.
Yep.
And so when you talk about that and think about how you get governments to really start actioning, one thing that I'm beginning to feel is our politics has become performance politics. And so we sign trade deals with Asia, with UK. We sign these deals, but we never seem to get to the next step of actually increasing our trade and productivity in that way.
Yeah.
But we cut the ribbons.
Yeah. Yeah, we have the photo op. We don't have the actual project and making it happen. And I'm hoping now, with whatever governments at federal and other levels we're going to have, people will realize the economy is important. We have to do something. We have to make it easier for the private sector to get things done. And we don't know if they're going to be doing that, but that's basically what needs to be done, because otherwise people are going to say, why should I do business in Canada? And now with the threat of tariffs, there's another problem. A lot more people are going to say, well, maybe I should move to the States so I won't have to worry about these tariffs.
Or I've got one foot in Canada, and there was talk in the paper that, for instance, we've got lots of uranium, but we can't process it and upgrade it, so we send it to the States.
Yeah.
And they are building a huge new plant in the States.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, if you were, and you've been sitting on all kinds of boards, but if you were sitting on a board now and staff came to you and said, okay, there's this opportunity in British Columbia, but it's a big capital investment, would you be supportive of even saying yes to that?
I would have to look at it very, very carefully, because doing business here is slow, it's not easy, and the government hasn't had the reputation of being very strongly pro-business.
And business people, unfortunately, don't run very often for politics, so there's no one around the cabinet table that says, oh, wait a minute.
Well, if I may say a word about the mayor of Vancouver.
Yes.
Before he was first elected, he spoke, and he's a business person, and he started more than one business, and I thought, just what we need in the city. And one of his campaign promises was, I am going to fix these permitting delays. We're going to have fast permitting, and it's going to happen. And then he got elected, and it didn't.
And it takes at least as long.
It takes at least as long. I mean, we all know horror stories about developments that didn't happen because it took too long for someone to make a decision.
And the other thing that's been happening lately is politicians put their little fingers in the pie. I've been a politician, so I can be critical. you get cross indications. You get maybe the federal government pushing this sort of initiative, you get the province pushing a different initiative, and then the city does something that counters both of them. What would a business person do? They'd run.
Yeah. Well, I remember a minister from Argentina came and was trying to seduce our mining industry down to Argentina. And he said we have rules, we have environmental rules, we have other rules. We'll tell you what they are, and they won't change. We have taxes, you'll pay the taxes, these are the taxes, and they won't change. We have 3 levels of government, you will only have to deal with one, and it won't change. And I remember at that time going to the person who was our current mining minister federally and said, you know, the miners were very interested in that. And she just sort of shrugged and said, oh, well, you know, they don't have the people down there. They don't pay the wages down there. And as a matter of fact, wages in the mining industry in Argentina were equivalent to Canada for all levels except the very lowest entry-level labor. And so if that is our attitude, if we don't say we'd better compete, we'd better get our act together, we'd better be as good or better than anybody else if we want the business, we're not going to get the business.
So you're an economist and a historian. When tariffs come in, do they ever go out?
Yes.
Do you think Trump would ever back off?
I don't know about Trump, but Trump's not going to last forever. No, but I mean, we had Canada was a protected economy until the 80s when we got our first free trade agreements with the United States. And we paid for it. We paid hundreds of dollars more for every appliance and $10 or $20 more for every piece of clothing. And we had, you know, less choice, poorer quality, more expensive things than the States.
And so on that, not all that optimistic a note, we're going to have to leave the future and see what happens, whether we do get into this tit for tat on tariffs. But thank you so much for your perspective and your detailed knowledge of tariffs, Roz.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back in a moment. One thing we can say with certainty, the world is not going to go back to the good old days of freer trade anytime soon. Trump's threats and actions have woken Canadians up to a new reality. We can no longer assume the United States will prioritize our best friend status. However this trade war plays out, Canada must have leadership that takes our independence seriously. Let me know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.